to ask the lights to be dimmed earlier, because I'm finding that poetry should be something to be enjoyed, because you wouldn't play or a symphony or anything like that. A little bit of ambiance. They took the candles off the table, but we got the fights, so we're good. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me here. But thanks also to all of you. This is one of those moments where it's really about all of us here today. It's about this moment that we're gathered together to really celebrate the great work that we all do together and how important that work is, especially in the climate of our last few years where the arts and arts education have been somewhat dwindled for several reasons. So I just want us to take a moment and just recognize in all of us the very special thing that we do. Each one of us sitting at these tables is part of the reason that arts continue. Whether it's in Delaware in particular, but all of you in some ways are directly or indirectly possible for myself being here. For a little Cuban kid from Miami to be able to have a life in the arts. So thank you. The question that was posed to me today, or that I was supposed to answer somehow, was how has arts, and in my case in particular poetry or the literary arts, impacted my life? And I got to tell you, it was a difficult question, a very complex question. At first I thought, I got this, it's fine. But really, part of the difficulty and the complexity of that is that I can't separate who I am from my work. I can't separate the poet from the work, just like the dancer and the dance can't be separated, or the painter and the canvas. Sort of, we live our lives sort of just melded together. So there are a million ways I could answer that question, how have arts impacted my life? A million ways. But I gotta say, in the last sort of few months, last almost year now, the most significant answer I can give you to that is that poetry allowed me to understand that my story, who I am, is as American as anything else. The idea of finally feeling like I belong to the country. And it was poetry that brought me there. So hold on to that thought for a moment. So I want to take you on that little journey for a little while. How did little Ricky singing "Oh Jose, Can You See" and the national anthem make it to the podium in January 21st of last year, of this year actually? It's a journey that began even before I was born, as John was saying. By the time my mother had left 7 months pregnant from Cuba, so I claimed my soul as Cuban. And we immigrated from Cuba to Spain when I was born, and 45 days later we immigrated again to the United States. So by the time I was 45 days old, I belonged to 3 countries figuratively. My newborn photo was my green card photo. And if that wasn't God trying to tell me something, I was like, Richard, this is going to obsess you the rest of your life. I don't know what is. It's those moments where you think you can write your own biography, you can make this up if you wanted to. So it was this weird foreshadowing of all those questions of home and belonging and connection to place that would obsess me eventually in my work. But mostly I grew up in Miami, which meant that I grew up between 2 imaginary worlds. One was the imaginary world of my parents and grandparents, that Cuba of the 1950s and 60s, this paradise we left and we couldn't go back to. Why, I couldn't understand exactly, but this whole idea that there was this otherness that we belonged to. And the other one was, which is not so obvious, is the America I saw on TV. So growing up in Miami, and anybody who's been in Miami understands that Miami was a very insular and very sort of culturally isolated place. In a way, Miami was very undiverse. Everyone around me was Cuban. the classmates were Cuban, the grocer was Cuban, the mechanic was Cuban, the mayor was Cuban. So in a weird way, I always like to say like diversity is relative. So when I moved up to Maine, I was like, you guys are really interesting. Those apple pies on the stoop, probably as strange as me coming out in a ruffled shirt and dancing the conga, you know what I'm saying? So I grew up sort of between those two worlds, but I wasn't conscious of it, navigating between those two identities, trying to find out where was the real imagined Cuba, the real imagined United States. And it was the America I imagined from TV, from the Brady Bunch and Leave It to Beaver and all these other shows. I really thought that America existed. In fact, I have blueprints of the Brady Bunch house still on my computer that I will build someday in Cuba. So, and I say this in retrospect. I say this when, hindsight is 2020, because it wasn't. You go through life, of course, as a child, as a teenager, and you're kind of absorbed in these things, but nothing really you're not really totally conscious of it. And it wasn't until I started writing poetry that world, that awakening happened. That idea of the awakening of me onto me. And this is another moment that I can't quite make up. First graduate writing course with Campbell McGrath at Florida International University. I'm petrified. I'm an engineer. I've done Calculus 5, but hadn't written a sentence in 4 years. And we read some Ginsberg and some Frost, and he says to us, and some Whitman, of course, and he says to us, here's your first assignment, write a poem about America. Which is exactly the assignment I got 20-something years later from Obama. So when they called, I was like, I got it. Don't worry. That lasted about 5 minutes. So anyway, I just wanted to share this poem with you because it really started, it really sparked, went home, I scratched my head, I'm like, America, Whitman, Ginsberg, Frost. What does that have to do with my environment, my community? And then I had a really hard time with the assignment, and finally I wrote this poem, which I had to be honest with. I gave them my America, right? So you should know 3 things about this poem. One is that for Cubans, we never really got Thanksgiving. I think that holds true for Latinos in general. In fact, as my mother calls it, it's San Giving, as in San Ignacio, San Pedro. It's a different kind of feast day. For Cubans, you should all know that pork is not the other white meat, it's the only meat. And there's a very sort of dangerous line here about Kennedy that, I didn't say it, I'm just quoting someone, but I don't think the White House caught that one. So here's the poem, and it's appropriately called America. Although Tia Miriam boasted she discovered at least half a dozen uses for peanut butter, topping for guava shells and syrup, butter substitute for Cuban toast, hair conditioner, and relaxer. Mama never knew what to make of the monthly 5-pound jars handed out by the immigration department until my friend Jeff mentioned jelly. Oh, but there was always pork though, for every birthday and wedding, whole ones on Christmas and New Year's Eves, even on Thanksgiving Day. Pork, fried, broiled, or crispy skin roasted, as well as cauldrons of black beans, fried plantain chips, and yuca burrito. These items required a special visit to Antonio's Mercado on the corner of 8th Street, where men in guayaberas stood in Senate blaming Kennedy for everything. Ese hijo de puta. Instead of a bitch. The bottle of Cuban coffee and cigar residue filling the creases of their wrinkled lips, clinging to one another's lies of lost wealth, ashamed and empty as hollow trees. By 7, I had grown suspicious. We were still here. Overheard conversations about returning to Cuba had grown wistful and less frequent. I spoke English. My parents didn't. We didn't live in a two-story house with a maid or wood panel station wagon, nor vacation camping in Colorado. None of the girls had hair of gold. None of my brothers or cousins were named Greg, Peter, or Marcia. No, we were not the Brady Bunch. And none of the black and white characters on Donna Reed or the Dick Van Dyke Show were named Guadalupe, Lasso, Mercedes. Betty Duke's family wasn't like us either. They didn't have pork on Thanksgiving. They ate turkey with cranberry sauce. They didn't have yuca. They had yams, like the dittos of pilgrims on colored clouds. So, a week before Thanksgiving, I explained to my abuelita about the Indians and the Mayflower, how Lincoln set the slaves free. I explained to my parents about the Purple Mountain's majesty, one if by land, two if by sea, the cherry tree, the tea party, the amber waves of grain, the masses yearning to be free, liberty and justice for all, until finally they agreed. This Thanksgiving, we would have turkey, as well as pork. Abuelita prepared the poor fowl as if committing an act of treason, faking her enthusiasm for my sake. My mom set a frozen pumpkin pie in the oven and prepared candied yams, following instructions I had to translate from the marshmallow bag. The table was arrayed with gladiolas. The plattered turkey loomed at the center of plastic silver from Woolworth's. Everyone sat in green velvet chairs. We had upholstered with clear vinyl, except for Carlos and Turkey, seated in the folded chairs in the Salvation Army. I uttered a bilingual blessing, and the turkey was passed around like a game of Russian roulette. Dry, Gilberto complained, and proceeded to drown the lean slices with pork fat drippings and cranberry jelly. La mierda roja esa, as he called it. Faces fell when Mama presented her okra pie. Pumpkin, calabaza, was a home remedy for ulcers, not a dessert. Tia Maria made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee, then Abuelo and Pepe cleared the living room furniture, put on a Celia Cruz LP, and the entire family began to merengue over the linoleum of our apartment, swirling rum and sugar. Until they remembered. It was 46 degrees in 1970 in America. Poetry has always been sort of my guiding light ever since that moment, since that sort of dawning, that awakening of like, and what poetry does is it awakens ourselves to our truer selves, to pay attention to the world, to stop and say like, wait, what's going on here? And the next question after where am I from, where do I belong, what is home, was, well, where are my parents from? Who are they? Who are these aliens living amongst us? And that question was particularly important for when it came to my mother. My mother left every single relative in Cuba, every aunt and uncle, every niece and nephew, every cousin. And back then, you really turned your back and you didn't know if you were ever going to see these people again. And my brother and I have always admired her courage for that. But in the process of writing the inaugural poem, and especially the third poem of the 3 that I had to write, is all based upon her and sort of her journey. I realized what incredible faith that took. Her story is not one just about courage, but about faith. The faith that she must have had in America, which was probably nothing more than a few pictures in a drugstore magazine, to make that move, to have that courage, took a lot of faith. And so this poem is sort of capturing one of those moments in which poetry sort of made me think about her in a different way. And she was no longer just my parent, but someone who was a sentient human being, someone who I suddenly felt was someone who had lost, who had questions, who was trying to do the best they could. It was that one moment in all our lives, I think, we have with our parents, where we finally see them as human beings and not just our parents. And that moment happened for me at a Cuban bodega in Miami. Mother picking produce. She scratches the oranges and smells the peel. Presses an avocado just enough to judge its ripeness. Polishes the Macintoshes, searching for bruises. She selects with hands that have thickened, fingers that have swollen with history around the white gold of a wedding ring she now wears as a widow. Unlike the archived photos of young, slender digits captive around black and white orange blossoms, her spotted hands now reach into the colors. I see all the folklore of her childhood, the fields, the fruit she once picked from the very tree, the wiry roots she pulled out of the very ground, and now, among the collapsed boxes of yucca, through crumbling pyramids of golden mangoes, she moves with the same instinct and skill. This is how she survives death and her son, on those humble duties that will never change, on those habits of living that keep a life alive. She holds up red grapes to ask me what I think. And what I think is this: a new poem about her. The grapes look like dusty rubies in her hands. But what I say is simply this: it looks sweet, Mama. Very sweet. One of the questions I get asked a lot, even before the whole inauguration, you're a poet and an engineer? They look at you like a one-eyed monster. What's going on with that? And I love that. I love that for one thing. And in the context of this room and why we're gathered here together, why not? Why can't you be a poet and an engineer, or an engineer and a poet, whichever comes first, I'm not sure. But I wanted to share this poem with you because it gives you a little bit of an emotional background of my decision to become an engineer. And as I've been telling kids all across the country and universities, you may not have a liberal arts degree, but you need to take a liberal arts approach to life. Because everything that you learn, every single thing that you will use. And I am a better engineer, and I want to say I've been a practicing engineer till Obama called. And it scares me not to do the engineering because that's part of who I am too. But in any case, I always say I'm a better engineer because I'm a poet, and I'm a better poet because I'm an engineer. This also climbs into the idea, and one thing I wanted to share with you tonight was, part of that decision was partly to do with my status as an immigrant. So we weren't sitting around the dinner table talking about Picasso or Frost. And even if we would have, we were a working class family. Even if we would have, there's a cultural divide, which was we would have been talking about Nicolas Guillen or José Martí and Michel Lam and that sort of tradition. So I grew up in a very sort of the idea of a life in the arts was just basically not within the realm of possibility. Now we're talking like the 70s. I hope that's changed. I think it's changed thanks to some of the work that you're doing. But it just wasn't a possibility. I mean, I was also a left-brain, right-brain kid. I gotta admit that. Like, I would draw flowers and propulsion systems for like new spacecrafts. And it was just like, but this is just sort of the emotional background of some of my engagement with engineering and why I became an engineer. And it's really a portrait about my father and myself. And you should know a little bit of geometry. The engineer has to explain that to you. It's a bridge that I used to drive over every day in Miami going to work. And to the left, you'll have all the Civic Center, which where all the hospitals are. And to the right, you have this sort of beautiful skyline of the city, and then the rest of Miami, which is flat as a pancake. So you're like, it's this bird's eye view in a way of Miami. And it was written during a time that I was doing a lot of bridge design. I became fascinated with the bridge as a metaphor, as a symbol. Papa's Bridge. Morning, driving west again, away from the sun, rising the slit of the rearview mirror, as I climb on slabs of concrete bent into a bridge, arcing with all its parabolic Y, square splendor. I rise to meet the shimmering faces of buildings above treetops smashed into a calico of greens, forgetting the river below runs, insists on running, and scouring the earth, moving it grain by grain. And if only for a few inclined seconds every morning, I am 12 years old, with my father standing at the 10th floor window of his hospital room, gazing at the same bridge, like a mammoth bone aching with the gravity of its own dense weight. The glass dosed by a tepid light, reviving the city as I watched and read him sleeping, wondering if he could even dream in such dreamless white. Was he flying? Was he falling? Was he flying? Was he falling? Who was he? Who was I underneath his eyelids, flitting like the birds across rooftops, and the early morning stars wasting away? The rush hour cars pushing through the avenues like the tiny blood cells through his vein. The IV spiraling down a string of clear licorice, feeding his forearm, bruised pearl and lavender, colors of the morning haze, and the pills on his tongue. The stitches healed, while the room kept sterile with the usual silence between us. For 3 days, I surfed in water or juice in wilting paper cups, flipped through muted soap operas and game shows, filled out the menu card stamped bland diet for 3 nights. I wedged flat, strange pillows around his bed and his body, shaped like a fallen S, mortared in place by layers of stiff parquet. When he was ordered to walk, I took his hand. Together we stepped to the window and he spoke. Mijo, someday you'll know how to build bridges like that. Today, I cross this city, this bridge again, still spanning the silent distance between us with the memory of a father and son, holding hands, and secretly in love. I'm a little behind, but we started late, so I get some points up here now. I want to share one poem with you and then the inaugural poem. So eventually I went to Cuba, and there's a search, like, okay, well, let's go look at Cuba, that imaginary real world. And Cuba was an amazing experience. It was like this other full circle of your life, this pop-up book is the best way I can explain it. One of those children's pop-up books where suddenly everything that was in your head becomes 3 dimensions, all those stories and all the family and all the landscapes. But at the end of the day, through poetry and understanding, and poetry has always been my guiding light, a way of investigating my life, investigating my feelings. I realized that great place, but it wasn't exactly the place that of my parents. So there's this real sort of disconnect at the same time that there was amazing connection. And I couldn't live there legally even if I wanted to. So I said, well, Richard, or Rich, as I like to call myself in my head, let's go to America. As we like to say in Miami, we love living there because it's so close to the United States. And you don't need a passport. So I said, fine, we'll just go to Laguna, to the crib. And I got a job, my first teaching job after my first book, and I moved to Connecticut, thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was thinking sleigh rides in the snow, Martha Stewart and me, arts and crafts on Tuesdays, making everything by hand, carving pumpkins. And of course, that didn't quite work. So we all know that was another reality, that it was another idealized version from TV, as I explained earlier. So I said, all right, Rich, well, let's just move back to South Florida, Miami, because this seems to be the only place that you can exist. This place that even today is still sort of floating between these 2 imaginary worlds. It's this really sort of a passageway between the Americas and the United States. And so that didn't quite work out either, and that's what this poem's about. It takes place in Marco Island, which is where I took my partner Mark to Marco Island. It was a place where we used to vacation as kids, and into adolescence. Poor man's vacation was like $150 for the whole week in July, when you sweat to death. And of course, I hadn't been there in 20 years, so I take my partner Mark to take that proverbial sort of trip down memory lane, thinking, of course, nothing has changed. Nobody asked my permission. And I went into this rant and rave, and how dare they? And I realized I had one of those moments where you're like, I just became my parents again, didn't I? And what was interesting about that is that in some ways it made me realize that their feelings of this idea of loss, of longing, of trying to find a place was really universal in a different way. Here I was, someone who had no reason to feel like that, but here was Marco Island that became my Cuba in a weird way. And I think it's a really fundamental human sort of feeling. And as I've read this poem throughout the country, I found that everybody has their own little Gulf motel. That one place in your life, that one memory that you just don't want anyone to mess with. Looking for the Gulf Motel, Marco Island, Florida. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll a luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 24 loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the marble lobby. All because, mijo, we can't afford to eat out. Not even on vacation. Only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be for the first time watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the amber sunset at the Gulf Motel. Watching us dive into the pool, his 2 sons he'll never see grow into men who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive, slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Gulf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea, and the stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom, sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Gulf Motel, for everything that should still be but isn't. I want to blame the condos, their shadows for ruining the beach in my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky mansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Gulf Motel exactly as it was and pretend, just pretend for a moment that nothing I've lost is lost. In the interest of time, I wanted to share some excerpts of a new narrative that's coming out of the National Enquirer version of the whole inauguration, from the minute I get the phone call to the minute I drive back home to Maine. The whole emotional, spiritual, and creative journey. But I'll save that so you can buy the book. So, and in the interest of